the courage to be and to act. I want to ask you how you think of yourself in terms of the word courage. Would you define yourself as a courageous person? Have there been times in your life that you have mustered up the courage to do something that maybe you didn't think you could really do, and yet you found, gosh, you were able to do it. You were able to do it. The courage to be and to act. I look at our spiritual teachings and principles and practices in a very practical way. I believe that these teachings are meant to change us at depth. I believe that our teachings are meant to help us be stronger people, better people, more loving people, more courageous people. I believe that our teachings, when understood and applied, allow us to not only change our own lives, but to be an instrument to help bring about positive change beyond our own lives, further and further out. The courage to be and to act. What is courage? We all know it when we see it, don't we? We know it when we see it. The Oxford Dictionary defines it this way. Courage is the ability to do something that frightens one. Strength in the face of pain or grief. The ability to do something that frightens one. And there's all different kinds of being afraid, aren't there? It's not just one kind of being afraid. We might think of courage in the light of something that scares us physically, a physical act that we've never done before that frightens us, or it can be a form of moral courage or moral fear that we have. The face of courage is very different, and I think as we mature, we begin to understand courage in a broader way. I think as a young person, if you had asked me to describe or define courage, I would have thought really in the context of physical heroes. You know, those people who are physically strong and courageous. I would think of people who go into battle. I would think of first responders. I would think, as a very, very young child, of characters that my brother loved to watch, Superman. That's what it means to be a person of courage, the physical strength, the physical ability, bravery to overcome something. And I think as we mature, we begin to expand our understanding of courage, to include that forms of physical bravery that we may or may not ever be called upon to express. But I think we begin to expand that sense of courage to look at examples of moral courage. I think it's the reason that we hold in high regard leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi and the moral courage that he demonstrated in the face of freeing India from British control and all that went into that. We think of people like Martin Luther King Jr., right, and the whole civil rights movement and all the leaders in the civil rights movement, and what moral courage they demonstrated. I recently was watching, I don't know if it was a documentary or how I came upon learning of a young girl in the 1960s. Her name was Ruby Bridges. And what a model of moral courage at such a young age. She was a first grader. She was part of the first group of students to racially integrate schools in Louisiana. At that time in 1960, there were 6 Black students who had passed a battery of tests and were deemed smart enough to go to an all-white school. And Ruby was one of those 6. Of those 6, 2 of the children decided to stay in their all-Black schools because, for whatever reason. You can imagine why they would have, but 2 of them decided to stay in the all-Black schools. 3 were assigned to McDonough School, and Ruby was the one student assigned to integrate William Frantz School. And the story of her doing that was such a model of moral courage on her behalf and of course her mother's behalf. She integrated the school all on her own. In that first year, many white parents pulled their children from the school, including the parents of the rest of the first grade class. Most of the teachers left too, and for all of first grade, it was only Ruby and her teacher. Right. There are so many stories like that of true heroism, as far as I'm concerned. You know, there's the fear of physical harm, right? When people have the courage to run into a burning building, to jump in front of a moving vehicle to save a child or so forth. That's a certain act of courage, and I don't discount that at all. I think some of that might almost be instinctive, almost, you know, adrenaline kicks in and we do what has to be done, and thank God for that. But moral courage, to stand up for what is right when it can cause a great deal of fear and potential harm of an emotional and mental and psychological level, I think is enormous. And everyday courage that we are called upon, taking action we know is right, even when we're afraid to. I bet there have been times in your life that you have done that very thing, that you have taken the higher road, the right course of action, even when you were afraid, and even when you may have suffered consequences for doing so. Asking for help can be an act of everyday courage. Some of us have been brought up to think that we have to do everything all on our own, and that it is a sign of weakness to ask for help, when in fact, really, it is a sign, I think, of humility, vulnerability, and strength and courage to ask for help, to admit, I can't figure this out, or I don't know how to do this, and to own that and to reach out to someone or something that might be able to assist. Apologizing can certainly be an act of everyday courage, can it not? Have you ever felt that you needed to apologize and you really wanted to apologize for some harm you had done, intentionally or unintentionally, but gosh, it took so much courage for you to do so? Of course, sometimes the things that we know are the right thing to do are the things that can also scare us, because we may lose face, we may be embarrassed, we may be physically harmed, we may lose resources, we may lose esteem. And yet there's something in us that says, do the right thing. There's a courage in you to do the right thing. Here's a broader definition I like of courage. Courage is taking practical and deliberate action to achieve a moral end in situations that may be dangerous or in which you might lose something. Let me repeat that. Courage is taking practical and deliberate action to achieve a moral end in situations that may be dangerous or in which you might lose something. There have been times in my life in ministry that I've needed to take a particular action that I knew was the right action, but I also knew that in taking that action, that I might not be able to explain all the reasons that went into that action, and I might very well be criticized, judged, and suffer a significant amount of harm or loss. And some of you are nodding your heads. You've probably been in similar places, right? Where you've had to do something that you knew was the right thing to do, and you did it to the best of your ability for the right reasons at the right time. And even with all that rightness, doesn't mean that everybody's going to be privy to everything that went into that act of moral or ethical courage that you demonstrated. Does this make sense, what I'm saying? And yet, what I have found to be true, and I bet you have too, is that when we do act in that way, that there's a certain strength and solace that we experience for being that way, that allows us to put our head on our pillow at night and sleep with a peaceful conscience, right? and sleep with a peaceful conscience. It's so easy, and I find myself guilty of this. It's so easy when I think of courage to think of the kinds of people I've already mentioned, to think of the Gandhis and the kings, and to think of the firefighters. And, we just came back from a family wedding in Washington, D.C., and we took a little bit of personal time and went to some museums and toured Yorktown and Jamestown and the African American Museum, the Holocaust Museum, and got filled with history and so many examples of just how heroic and strong human beings can be. And there's a part of me that just, I think of that when I think of courage. And I have to remind myself that it is that, but it is also every time in my own simple, everyday life that I do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. That if I hear somebody gossiping about someone, if I hear a racial slur, if I hear a homophobic joke or story, or I see somebody being marginalized, that I just don't play nice and quiet and do nothing. That I acknowledge it, that I address it. What is the expression? Speaking truth to power, right? Speaking truth to power. If people of mind and heart, as I believe we are in this teaching, don't do that, I don't even want to imagine that. People of mind and heart like us need to speak with courage, need to act with courage. Everyday courage to be and to own all of who you are. Debbie Ford's quote, to be and to own all of who you are without apology. Without apology. To be and own all of who you are without apology. A dear ministerial friend of mine has recently turned me on to a podcast that I've fallen in love with. Thank you, Reverend Ann Tabor. The podcast is Wiser Than Me. And ladies, and gentlemen, if you've not checked this out, you might want to check out the podcast Wiser Than Me. I forget, Julia Louis-Dreyfus is the person who does all the interviews, and she seeks out women who are much older than she is to interview them and to ask them what have they learned through the long course of their life. And one of the podcasts that I was recently listening to, I can't remember now if it was her interviewing Julie Andrews or maybe it was Carol Burnett or Jane Fonda, one of the three of them. All of them were excellent. One of the interviewees was talking about how what happens when we grow older, what happens for many people when they grow older, is they get back in touch with who they were as a younger person when they were told it was not okay to be that person. And they get to a place in their life where they say they don't give up. You can fill in whatever you want there. They don't give up about what people think anymore. They're going to be that strong. And so one of the women was talking about being discouraged for being ambitious and strong and a leader, that she should be a little more quiet, a little more demure, and that, she now feels this no need to apologize for who and what she really is. Everyday hero, everyday courage. I think about quite a bit, actually. I think about what it's got to be like right now to be a trans person. We've come through, most of us in this room have lived through a time where if you were gay, you were, to use this term, in the closet, right? There was great risk for you to come out and unapologetically be who you are. And I'm so grateful that we have moved so far through that. I'm sure there's still work to be done, but progress has been made. And progress in racism has been made too, though I think there's a heck of a lot more that we need to go through. And you can't hide it when you're Black, right? You can hide it if you're gay. You can hide certain aspects of sexual orientation. But a trans person, not so easily. And I find myself in listening to the news and hearing some of the things that are being talked about being changed, thinking what courage it must take to actually come out and be who you really are. I don't profess to understand everything about sexuality in that way, but I do recognize the tremendous courage it must take for any person to really unapologetically be who they are. And who are we to ever be in judgment of that? Who are we to, that deserves an amen. Who are we to ever, be in judgment of that? But that's where our high road or our moral courage comes in. Because I think we're living in a time where we're going to be called upon to at least be willing to show up and speak a higher truth, a higher understanding, one that comes out of love, out of tolerance. When I did my brother's wedding just a couple of weeks ago, my brother's white and his new wife is black. And we were talking about what it was going to look like walking into it wasn't in a church, but walking down the aisle, how the groom's family usually sits on one side and the bride's family. I said, it's going to look like black and white. I said, what if we tell the ushers, mix them all up so you don't have this black and this white? And they loved the idea. And I found myself saying to them something I've said many times before, and I swear by, I believe with everything in every fiber of my being. The soul has no color. The soul has no sexual orientation. It's not that, right? So we may not understand it all. We may not be completely comfortable with it all. We recently auditioned a young person that we may be able to invite to be one of our visiting artists, and this person goes by the pronouns they and them. A big stretch for some of us who were auditioning the person and especially for me. I'm really good most of the time with grammar. So, I'd learned the right pronouns and objects and predicates and all of that. And so for me, it's a grammatical thing, right? But it's all these places that whether we fully understand it or not, I think we can be understanding. Does that make sense? We may not understand everything, but we can be understanding. We can be understanding. And if we're serious about this part of our mission statement, I certainly am. I love the first part. I'm all about trying to work on Wendy and get her as good as I can get her, but I'm committed to that part. I'm committed to that part and to being as mindful as I can at all times, and it doesn't mean I do it perfectly. I don't. But the intention is there to do what I can to help heal and transform our world. So I think, everyday heroes, that's us showing up and doing what is right in the face of what is happening to us. What everyday courage can look like, showing up fully as ourselves and letting our true selves be seen. Willingness to question what we believe to be true. Listening more than speaking. Speaking and acting in alignment with our core values. Willingness to acknowledge our limits, to say we don't know when we don't know, to look at our part in the problem, to consider other points of view, So I begin to wrap this up. I want to share with you a little bit of something I heard in a recent TED Talk. It was a TED Talk by novelist Karen Thompson, and the name of the talk was What Fear Can Teach Us. And she says that fear can be understood as an amazing act of the imagination and as an unintentional storytelling that we were born knowing how to do. I like that last part. We know that fear is a certain use of our imagination. Just like I say, if you can worry well, or you can worry effectively, maybe that's not the right way to say it, but if you can worry, you can meditate. Because worry is locking on to something negative, right? And if you can do that, you can do the other, right? I guess I haven't said that in a while. I've said that many, many, many times. But I liked how she said it's an unintentional storytelling that we were born knowing how to do. that we were born knowing how to do. She says, fears have the same elements as stories. Characters, usually us and the ones we love, plots, usually catastrophic ones, and plenty of suspense. There's a lot of accuracy with that. I think she's got it. She says the task is to read our fears like stories for the glimpses of wisdom and insight they have to give us about who we are, what we love, what we hold near and dear. Fascinating talk. If you want to go and find it, it's What Fear Can Teach Us by Karen Thompson. So a little bit of suggested practice or homework. Number one, be willing to look squarely, directly at the things you're afraid of. And is it a physical fear? Is it a financial fear? Is it a moral fear? Is it an everyday kind of fear? Be willing to look at it squarely and try to understand, try to categorize it. What is the fear? Fear usually is connected with the sense of losing something. So what is it that you're concerned about losing? Because sometimes that can then help you back into how to address it better. When caught in a cycle of worry, check out and challenge the story you're telling yourself. What is the story you're telling yourself? Write it down so you can see it, and then change the story that you're telling yourself. And lastly, actively seek out opportunities to act with courage, calling upon your faith. Calling upon your faith. And the story I shared earlier about Ruby Bridges, I think about her mother. Her mother was in some of that story, and Ruby went to school with, what do they call it, the Secret Service, with her, protecting her to take her into school, and her mother went with her for the first few weeks or so, but then she couldn't anymore. She had to take care of the other kids and do work at home. And she told her daughter, call upon God, call upon your faith. It'll guide you through. And I think, wow, what strength, what a model. How can we stretch into even a little bit of that? Close with these words from Susan Frederick Ray. Courage is something we all need. It's something we all can live in our lives. It's something that's attainable. More than this, it is needed. Not just in historic lives, not just in dramatic moments, but every day. We need the courage to show another way to live, a way that is not based in ego or control, not out of domination, power, or materialism. We need ways of being in the world that don't place our sense of worth in being right or being successful, but rather in being human, in being true to ourselves. And for this, we absolutely need courage. Namaste.